Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, which is a critical look at Canada's role abroad, coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations. I'm Yves Engler, and we've been doing this for about three and a bit years, 3 years maybe in, I don't know, 2 months, something like that. Um, and this week was a bit of an odd one for me. So, uh, kind of busy with activist stuff and all kinds of backlash, which I'll get to in a bit. So I don't know if I've didn't I know I would say I didn't follow international affairs as closely as I usually do. So we'll see. We'll see what there is to say. Starting off, Journal de Montréal had a story titled "François Legault aime de plus en plus la Chine." So the Quebec premier said sort of positive comments on China. Basically, what he said was that in the context of difficulty with the U.S., that Canada can't exclude bit working with China, which is interesting because there's so much anti-China kind of rhetoric out there, and so the premier coming out pretty clearly and directly on that front is I think a positive development. Um, the ex-account Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who of course was the Haiti's independence leader, uh, he posts this thing and he says on X, which I think is a good way to look at U.S. Canadian policy in Haiti. And he says, Haiti here. When I tell people the reason why the white supremacist empire bullies us and has its knees on our backs is not because we have any more resources that it wants to steal, but rather it is because bullies bully everyone and especially the most vulnerable black kid around. And I agree with that. I don't think that understanding um, U.S. led policy in Haiti is principally about sort of profits or capitalist kind of interest. Yeah, I mean, in an indirect sense, yes, but in a direct sense, it's about basically just beating up on the weak kid, as this person is framing it. So I think that's a good way to understand policy in Haiti. There's a story, I think it was in the National Post, deploying with Brits instead of U.S. Navy, just happy coincidence. And it's about Canadian naval vessel from Halifax going on a year-long expedition or traversing the globe, and it's leaving with a British ship instead of U.S. And usually it would be leaving with U.S. ships. And the kind of subtext to it all is, well, not the subtext, but it's because it's in the title, but basically that it's sort of maybe more controversial to be deploying with U.S. naval vessels. Now, of course, during its long uh, global mission, it will be with U.S. Vessels regularly, but they quote a bunch of sort of like spouses and others basically saying, in this context with Trump attacking Canada, it's better not to be deploying with the U.S. Now, this gets to kind of this point, which I think is really a central point in challenging Canadian militarism right now, which is that playing off the rise of nationalism to embarrass the Canadian military over its clear relations with the U.S., its extensive relations with the U.S. And this is, I think, one of the things we should be pushing is the idea that Canada ends all naval deployments with U.S. Under U.S. sort of led missions, and of course this I'm not. It was HMCS. I'm not sure if it was HMCS Ville du Québec, or I forget which Canadian naval vessel it was deploying. but that point about deploying with the US has become far more controversial. Esprit du Corps had a story about Andrew Leslie, headlined Canadian general who advised giving Trump what he wanted joins right-wing think tank. And it talked about Leslie posting about 2 months ago, sort of do whatever Trump wants kind of angle. And he's now got this new position with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and the kind of pushback to this Canadian general being very deferential to the U.S. Leslie was part of that when the the embassy in Ottawa, U.S. embassy, cabled the State Department and said that when they appointed Freeland as foreign minister, they were adopting a America First foreign policy back in 2017. The Leslie was the other person that was discussed in that cable about his close ties with the U.S. during his time as a Canadian military person, and so this whole kind of like the right wing world, and it was a bit of a controversy about that this week, that the former what used to be called the Manning Summit, now it's called, I forget what it's called now, named after Preston Manning. It's just a right wing get together, annual get together in Ottawa, and they had the top uh, tariff person, I think, from the first Trump administration. It was a bit of a pushback about why would you be, both the Liberals and the NDP got criticized it, and sort of kind of trying to say the Conservative Party, by through this conservative sort of think tank summit, that it was sort of adopting a pro-Trump kind of outlook. And this Andrew Leslie's thing kind of fits within that kind of direction as well, where there's a strong support among a segment of the obviously the military, but also of the conservative kind of party world to Trumpism at a time when Trumpism is not very popular in Canada. Today, Mark Carney, I missed his bus by like 2 or 3 minutes this morning, biking over at 9 a.m., just after 9 a.m. I just gave a shot at the hotel that he stayed at 2 weeks ago in Montreal, that he might be staying there as well. And I biked over there and I saw his bus just as it was leaving. And it was leaving for a press conference at Bombardier in Dorval, in the suburbs of Montreal. And there he announced, apparently with hundreds of Bombardier workers, that Canada was going to try to surpass the NATO 2% military spending target. And was gonna, this was gonna be jobs, and this was gonna be sort of military Keynesianism, a little bit of that kind of stuff, and we are gonna purchase more and more from Canada, and reiterated the F-35 questioning, and so yeah, so here we are. We're on the path here. We're on the path to now that 2% is no longer the acceptable, and now we're already committing to go above 2% at the level of the prime minister. Whether he actually gets there or not, I don't know. But we're setting up that path, which is a very troubling redirection of social resources to killing versus more ecologically and socially useful endeavors. The Canadian-wide Peace and Justice Network, they've come out with their lawn signs, election lawn signs. Canada out of NATO now, decrease military spending, increase social spending, independent foreign policy. Ken Stone, who's a friend of this show, I believe that they're $15 if people are interested. And I think you can get in touch with Ken about him. I posted about it on my X if people want to take a look at what they look like. And now, in the context of Carney calling for this increase above 2%, this week on Wednesday or Thursday, Jonathan Perrineau, the co-leader of the Greens, had a press conference kind of launching the Greens' foreign policy. So I went there, and quite a weird thing. Right walking in, Pedno uh, very weirdly sort of makes a big kind of kerfuffle that I'm there, and goes out of his way to say how he doesn't like my style of journalism and this and that. And I'll get to, I think, part of why he did that in a little bit, which is just really bizarre, a freak out in the French language media against me, which I'll get into a little bit. But he starts off by basically like kind of condemning me, which is really, in my opinion, kind of embarrassing because he's about to launch into his own press conference, and my one way or another seemed to have nothing to do with this press conference. I showed up at his press conference 10 days earlier, 2 weeks earlier, I don't remember exactly when, and asked the question, maybe asked two questions, I don't remember, but no problem. It was all fine. Anyway, so he then launches into this 7-minute description of the uh, Green Party foreign policy, and it was bad. I mean, it was bad. It was bad. He very much he painted this picture that there's three global superpowers that threaten Canada: China, Russia, and now the U.S. And we need to rearm. These countries are violating international law. Of course, I think that's the case with the U.S. and Russia in terms of Ukraine and the U.S. in all kinds of different areas in terms of the act of aggression. Uh, but I don't think that's at all true with China. In fact, China has been basically, not involved in any military affairs for many, many years, many decades. And so that's just an obvious kind of anti-China to connect those three. But it was this very kind of, I would say war, hawkish. He did, and so he doesn't mention Israel in the context of violation of international law. He does refer to it as a genocide, and he does call for the basics of an arms embargo and some criticism of Israel, but he doesn't lump in. So while he talks about China violating international law, he doesn't cite Israel as having bombed, Syria regularly for the past 10 years, and obviously a lot recently, Lebanon, in Gaza, bombing Iraq, bombing Yemen, bombing Iran. So, China is not, there's not nothing approaching Israel in terms of its violence. Um, and and so that was kind of interesting. I asked him uh, two questions. The first question is because he in the thing he says that he wants to put the money he doesn't they're opposed to F-35, but he's very clear that he wants like Canadian or European made fighter jets. So I asked kind of this precision. I said, like, in 2021, Elizabeth May signed the No New Fighter Jets for Canada statement with Neil Young and Sarah Harmer and David Suzuki and people like that. And I said, so you just want to make that clear. You want the fighter jet. And he was very clear. We need fighter jets. And then he ends it off with uh, not buying fighter jets and not spending tens and tens of billions of dollars would be kneeling before China, Russia, and the U.S. So he took this this notion that these fighter jets are about defending Canada, when in fact, of course, Canadian fighter jets have only been used to bomb, and they've dropped something like 1,600 bombs over the past 30 years or so uh, on Libya, on Iraq, on Serbia, and I mean, obviously, the Mark Carney's not feeling any pressure to not increase military spending when even the Liberals, I mean, he did say, or even the Greens, Pedno did say we don't support any arbitrary number. So he kind of made this little spot. It wasn't exactly clear if the arbitrary number was the 2% of GDP NATO target or the 5% that the Trump administration has been putting out recently. So he kind of made a little quip about that, but he didn't make it clear what that arbitrary proportion of GDP was, and the whole kind of ethos was this very militaristic. Now, he did agree with me in a very kind of hostile way. And ultimately, I think this was to his benefit because I shared it on social media and it got lots of traction. He did agree that Canadians who fought in Gaza should be investigated for violating Canada's War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity Act, and he also agreed that schools like Ben Akiva and others that are inducing Canadians to join the Israeli military should be investigated for violating the Foreign Enlistment Act. But really, in essence, well, I think I framed his answer in the sort of positive light of like, pressure to enforce Canadian law. All he really did say was just enforce Canadian law, which is a pretty low bar. Now, why I think Pedno was bizarrely aggressive when I walked into this press conference, which quite frankly, it was only one. It was like a Radio Canada camera, and it was me. That was it. So, he's trying to get attention, and I'm giving him attention by showing up. So, his aggressiveness was very out of place. Now, a couple of years ago, when I tried to question Pedno on his position on Ukraine, he took a really bizarrely aggressive position and wouldn't even let me into this launch event of the by-election over in the office and stuff. So he clearly, he's hostile to me in a general sense. But 2 weeks earlier, again, like I said, I showed up at the press conference, asked a question, all seemed kind of fine at that level. Now, why I think he was so hostile is because on Tuesday, I on the street, I bumped into this person named Richard Martineau, who is a Journal de Montréal columnist, maybe the most prominent Journal de Montréal columnist. He's usually on like page 4, page 6, and not on the op-ed page. And it's 3, 4 times a week, I think. And so I bump into him. I'm not familiar with any of his radio and t or very limited. I've never actually not familiar with radio really, and I've seen him on TV maybe a few times. Now I bump into him on the street. He's outside this pizzeria on Saint Denis Street, and I just turn my camera on and I say, "What do you think about the genocide?" And then I say, "What do you about Canada?" Something like, "What about Canada's support for the genocide?" And then he says, "I'm waiting for pizza," and I say something like, "On the street." And then his wife, who I don't actually know, but she's actually quite a prominent media personality herself, says, "You don't have the right to film us." And then he grabs my phone and takes my phone for longer than anyone else. I've had my phone, like Ben Mulroney took my phone 2 weeks ago. I've had Stephane Guilbeault's staffer took my phone. I've had, 4 or 5 times. Maybe I don't know how many times people take my phone. Usually it's for like 5, 10 seconds, and then they give it back. But Martineau actually puts it in his pocket, and he has it for like at least 30 seconds. It might have been longer than a minute. And I gradually just start getting more and more vocal, basically yelling at him to give my phone back. And eventually he gives it back. Now, then this thing, now we've like everything's been escalated quite a bit, and we get into this whole sort of like animated discussion. And he right away starts like mocking me. I'm kind of like stuttering a little bit. He's like acting like he's trying to find a police vehicle. So he sort of steps into the street looking for the police or something like that. And he starts mocking me because I'm sort of like stuttering. And very like literally right out of like totally childish kind of like mockery. And and so it goes on, and he lunges at my phone a couple times more. I have a video of one of it, and one I didn't post because the clip was already long enough. And so anyways, this thing happens, and I have the video showing right away. First of all, I'm speaking to him in French. He goes around everywhere lying. That's like speaking to him in English. It's not true at all. I don't turn to English until I'm getting very animated for him to give my phone back. And most of the whole interactions in French. So he completely lies repeatedly, and he just goes like all over. So this guy's got all these radio shows, which I didn't really know about, and he's got all these things, and he ends up doing like 6 or 7 like radio clips about this interaction. And there's all this just like he calls me a fool, a crazy person, He then gets whipped into bringing charges against me. So in his show, they kind of whip each other up. These three guys sort of chatting this kind of so-called garbage radio, and so he goes and he says he tries to press charges, and he says the cops say it's a crime. Obviously, it was no crime that happened. I just was, actually not even aggressively asking a question about genocide, public personality on the street. I'm like completely within your right to do that. Um, so anyway, all this stuff escalates. He says all kinds of crazy stuff. He says that heureusement que je ne portais pas de kippa. Sinon, ce gars m'aurait physiquement attaqué. So it's good that I didn't wear that he didn't doesn't wear a kippa because otherwise I would have physically attacked him. So if I would have just seen any someone identifying as being Jewish, I just would have attacked him on the street. He just like says that. He brings on Sija person to Eve's an anti-Semite. Eve goes on all the history, goes in back to Concordia times, goes in all this kind of different stuff, and he's like this whole thing. Now, um, he then Alex Terrell, the leader of the Green Party of Quebec, posts about it and says says like basically supports my questioning of Martineau, and then he loses it. He has this like 15-minute interview with Terrell, just like a total like break. He's like breaking down about stuff, and Terrell stays strong, and just basically and it goes a whole bunch of different points. So then the next day, so he tries to say that I'm a Russian agent during the interview with Terrell, because this Journal de Montréal claimed this a couple of years ago. And then the next day, Martineau goes on radio and says that two police agents got in touch with him to tell him that Alex Terrell is a Russian agent. So the Montreal police or other police are getting in touch with this Martineau, claiming that the leader of the Green Party of Quebec is a Russian agent. The day after, he accuses me of being a Russian agent. I mean, it's just like totally like outrageous kind of behavior. Who knows if he's just like making this stuff up or if police actually got in touch with him? It's crazy if the police did. That's really scandalous. So it's going on and on. He's just like I said. It gets published in the Journal de Montréal. It's big stories, like two photos of me like questioning Martineau, and then today they do a whole clip. Mario Dumont, was the leader of the right wing party here, who's a prominent media personality for a couple of decades, does a whole show where he brings on like a public safety official to say like what you should do if this happens to you, right? Like as if like we're just going up to random people on the street and putting our cameras in their face and like aggressively da da da. Okay, so he has a public this former police person who's like expert in public safety, and the guy compares it to an active shooter incident. Okay, so me walking down the street, bumping into this prominent media personality, turning my phone on, saying, "What do you think about the genocide?" is now being framed as comparable to an active shooter incident. And this is not just stated once in this interview, it's stated multiple times. And so they've just like completely lost it. They've completely lost this Martineau was like clearly very embarrassed or very offended by my first of all my questioning, and then my not backing down as he steals my phone and is totally aggressive asshole. Now, if anyone violated the law, of course, it's him by basically hitting my hand to take the phone. And there's this okay, so then this Journal de Le Devoir person who writes like in a like environmental section, not really sort of, but I guess she's like sort of a pro-Palestinian person. She kind of like comes to my defense on Facebook, and then he goes after her and does a whole clip, and he calls her a pauvre con, which sort of translates into a poor bitch. That not quite as bad as that, but that's sort of what it translates to. And he's apparently like gets people basically he's like getting like all people like going after her employer, and people she's getting death threats, and she's like quite troubled with this. Anyways, this prominent like law professor jumps in and explains the legalities of it all, and obviously concludes that like if anyone broke the law, it was Martineau, not me. And anyway, so it's like this huge, like it's like totally wildly out of proportion to the point where like at the Ottawa demo on Saturday, the Rebel News people, um, they come. Anyways, they're trying to get on. I know these Rebel News people because I see them a lot of press conferences. They're from Montreal, and so I kind of have like a rapport with them. I'm cordial with them because they have information on where the politicians might be. And anyways, I'm just kind of cordial with them. And people are trying to keep them off the main area of the Parliament Hill. And they come up to me trying to like ask, and she asks me this question, like, do you regret challenging Martineau? And I'm like, of course I don't regret challenging the guy. I just asked him a question just on the street. And so it's like this right wing world has got themselves so whipped up that they actually believe something like really crazy happened. And people shared this clip of this Rebel News person on the Sophie Durocher, who is Martineau's wife, who was there, who also basically tried to sort of attacks me, and is the one in the video saying you don't have the right to film us. This Rebel News person was on the Sophie Durocher's program like in recent days, and the whole complaint was that the Rebel News was being blocked from filming people doing Muslim prayer. I think at the end of a Palestine demo. So she's like has these people on like, oh, how dare they stop them from filming in the public square, these people praying. And then like a few days later, she's like, you can't film me while I'm standing on the street waiting for my pizza as these like, prominent, media personnel. Anyways, totally wild development and just keeps going. And anyways, and I think it speaks to like this and like their whole line was basically just got to be arrested and chucked in jail. That in their clips, these guys are just these right wing radio people. Just this guy's just got to be arrested, thrown in jail. He's a crazy. He's a social menace. Just toss him in jail. Why is he in jail? The Montreal police is way too soft on these people. There's a whole line of like the Hamasniks element to it. A part of it is an anti-Palestinian thing. Now I don't know Martineau, so I don't. I read his columns, maybe a third of his columns, and he's right wing, and he's but he's not on Palestine. He's not like the Toronto Sun people. He's not like wildly crazy Zionist. Okay, he wouldn't even probably necessarily call himself a Zionist. He's more into like bashing the encampments than he is to being just like straight Zionist. So now he's well known as being this anti-Muslim. There's actually a whole like master's thesis about his like 700 articles that were viewed as anti-Muslim over a long period. So he's like very well known as being anti-Muslim, and I was familiar with that. I had forgotten about it, published like a year ago, whatever. But he's not like the by English Canadian standards, he wouldn't be viewed as a particularly anti-Palestinian. By French Quebec standards, he is, but the standards are a little bit different. And so anyway, so he so it, but the, so trying to make sense of this, it's like this is really authoritarian, fascistic stuff, and I don't know exactly where this is all coming from. I think that Trump is boosting it. Obviously, the Zionist forces over the past 18 months that have just been like clamped down on these protests, these terrorists, the on list. This is they're pretty open fascist. The establishment Jewish community has become pretty openly fascistic, and they've really allied with this whole far right uh, sort of white supremacist world that's into this sort of attacking Muslims and that kind of stuff. So that's part of it, and I think the Trump stuff's part of it. And on that note, like I mentioned, Martineau had on the CJ Quebec spokesperson who was just going after me for all kinds of different things on the radio. And this week, CJ posted to Twitter, harassment isn't activism; it is a crime. At a time when Canadians from across the country are deeply engaged in the election, we must condemn efforts by some individuals, including Eve Engler, who is already facing harassment charges, to undermine our democracy. And then it goes on a bit. So CJA National's Twitter account explicitly says, I'm committing a crime of harassment and I'm wanted or I'm being pursued for other harassment crimes. And basically, CJA threw their lot in with Dahlia Kurtz. I was of the opinion that Dahlia Kurtz was not necessarily reflecting the view of the bit more mainstream pro-Israel Jewish organizations. That she was a bit more off on the far end, and now CJ has explicitly come in that direction, both by this statement on Twitter and by sending someone to be on Martineau's program to attack me. Now, this statement takes place before the Martineau incident, so it's I think in reaction to the Anna and the Mark Carney, but I think the Anna one is the one that about 10 days ago or whatever, I saw Anna, the Liberal MP, outside of the Mark Carney's hotel, and I challenged her, and she did this whole like Zionist tears. And anyway, you can read that long piece I talked about last week. You can read a long piece I did in response to Matthew Bedrin's about that. But so she just come out like full on, like basically lock Eve up. That's essentially their message. So there's this, this fascist ethos that's being pushed there. This week, Mark Carney announced in the unacceptable rise in anti-Semitism hate, and he's pushing for some variation of these what he's calling introduced bubble security zone legislation to protect places of worship, daycare centers, schools, etc. And this, of course, is in reaction to protests with Israeli soldiers and Zionist real estate fairs and stuff that have happened in synagogues and Jewish community centers. I wrote about, and I repeat, uh, these groups. It's not just when there's an IOF soldier there or these real estate fairs. If you look at these schools, they're promoting the Israeli military. There should be protests. A whole bunch of these Jewish community institutions, not just when there's specific odious events, but across the board because they are pushing odious politics all the time. But Carney is now pushing this kind of angle, and Polyev went even further. And I'll get to that in a second. Now, the Carney thing's interesting. So this week, a heckler, I believe on Tuesday, uh, said it's genocide in Gaza during Carney's event in Calgary, maybe. I'm not sure where. And Carney responds by saying something to the effect of, "I hear you, or I know. That's why we have a arms embargo." So the person yells genocide. He says, "I know," and that's why I have an arms embargo. So strongly suggesting that he's agreeing that it's a genocide, and therefore we have to have policy to lessen our contribution to the genocide. Now that created quite a bit of a pushback, and then Carney sort of walked his comment back the next day, or maybe it was 24 hours later when it kind of, I think it took 24 hours to break, and then 24 hours later. So he sort of walks it back a little bit. Said he didn't hear the word properly and kind of doesn't call it genocide. And then kind of waffles on recognizing Palestine because the French Macron said he was going to recognize Palestine in June, and Carney sort of waffles on that question. Now, after Carney had already walked the comment back, Netanyahu posts, I believe this is on Friday. He says Canada. He quote tweets Carney's. He quotes that Sun News person with the clip from Carney and basically making it portraying Carney badly and sort of endorsing the heckler's comment about genocide. And so Netanyahu quote tweets that, and he says Canada has always sided with civilization. So should Mr. Carney. But instead of supporting Israel, a democracy is fighting a just war with just means against the barbarians of Hamas. He attacks the one and only Jewish state. Mr. Carney, backtrack your irresponsible statement. Now, he'd already sort of backtracked the statement. Now, this to me is a flagrant interference in Canadian election. I think it's very clear from this comment that Netanyahu is hoping to get Polyev to help Polyev, and and then Polyev's reaction the next day Now, of course, none of the media frame this like that. No, I don't even see that. I don't think the NDP even criticizes Netanyahu for interference in foreign policy, Canadian election. Uh, now, the next day, uh, Polyev sort of goes further down the Trump Netanyahu axis, and he says basically says he says anyone who talking about Israel and talking about supposed rise in anti-Semitism related to Israel. Says anyone who is here on a visitor visa who carries out law breaking will be deported from this country. So he's basically saying I'm going to follow what Trump's been doing in deporting international students that have criticized genocide. And he also goes in, we will bring in tougher laws to target vandalism, hate marches that break the laws, and violent attacks based on ethnicity and religion. So he's taken it even further. So Carney's going with the bubble zone, and then Poilievre's going even further. So this Netanyahu intervention, I think, is pretty remarkable. And I just published a piece that talks about, this is just one piece of Israel's intervention, and you got everything from the funding of social media accounts, Islamic accounts targeting Canadian politicians, obviously the funding of Jewish schools in Canada. They have the whole Israeli emissary program and Jewish schools and Jewish day camps in summer camp, should I say, Jewish community centers, sponsored by the Jewish Agency. You have the Jewish Agency's official relationship to the Canadian federations, the Jewish federations, which have this long-standing formal ties to the Jewish Agency for Israel, which was created the State of Israel. And of course, CIJA is the advocacy agent of the federation. So this is all part of this of Israeli influence in Canada that gets very little attention, and it's very repressive. And on the repressive front, this week I think it came out last week. I think I mentioned last week that the McGill is trying to sabotage its student union because they followed their rules and allowed for a referendum on a strike, a vote on a strike, and the students voted overwhelmingly to strike, and so they're trying to end the agreement between the university and the student union. And now, just today or yesterday, McGill says it's trying to get an injunction against pro-Palestinian group, against SPHR. So they already banned it from being a group, or they forced the student union to not allow it to be a group. And now they're trying to get some sort of legal injunction against the student group. At the same time, B'nai B'rith is launched a class action lawsuit purportedly on behalf of all Jewish students at McGill for anti-Semitism on campus. And of course, this context here is three different overwhelming divestment votes by students over the past 2 years: hunger strike, encampment, rallies, and more repression, both at the official level, the university administration level, and the Zionist groups attacking. There's a story published about all these different universities that are turning to Israeli security, military, to repress students. And the story talks briefly about Concordia. I've mentioned some of this in the past, but I believe I was only aware of the percentage. And so this story says Concordia also enlisted two Israeli security firms, Perspective International, led by Adam Cohen, the former head of security for the Israeli Central Court in Jerusalem, and Moshav Security Consulting, operated by Eyal Feldman, a former Israeli Army Reserve commander, an ex-advisor to the Israeli Ministry of Defense. So the Concordia's turned to these Israeli security firms. I knew bits of this, but there's apparently more. On the note of the repression, the Jewish Community Center in Toronto, the downtown one, I believe, this guy Hamoud Ahmed Al-Wiali, he wore a keffiyeh to watch his son play a basketball game at the Jewish Community Center, and they kicked him out. and he showed this clip doing it. And the Jewish Community Center is funded directly by all kinds of grants, indirectly by tax subsidies as a registered charity. And he shows that in his clip that there's like Israeli flags flying, but him wearing a keffiyeh to watch his son play a basketball game, which they were invited to some, I don't know what the some tournament or some, whatever basketball league. He gets kicked out for it. There's also the Sean Orr. I think I talked about it briefly last week, but Sean Orr, this leftist, won the by-election city council position in Vancouver, and by a huge margin. And and I interviewed him. He was the person who got Selena Robinson, the clip of that Selena Robinson, the NDP cabinet minister in the BC government, that where she called Palestine a crappy piece of land, and it led to her being pushed out of cabinet. And he was the one who found the clip and then brought it to public attention. And this has just been an onslaught against him this week, uh, calling him an anti-Semite and bringing up all these different tweets that just like flagrant, like just like so outrageously misrepresenting what he said. He was mocking somebody who was actually putting forward an anti-Semitic trope, and made a comment about how everyone knows that the I don't know what I said. The Jewish cabal runs the dungeons of Vancouver City Hall. Like just like totally like obviously stupid kind of comment that he's like mocking. He's 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 opposing anti-Semitism by doing what he's doing. And so obviously so. And they throw it back at him, and then just this whole like week of all these different smear efforts with obviously it goes way beyond the Israel lobby, CJA, and the Vancouver Jewish Federation, but all these different politicians jumping in, and even one where he talked about his favorite band, and his favorite band is called All Pigs Must Die. And so people like took his tweet saying all pigs must die, but ignored what he was actually the question was. Anyway, so it's just shows you the power though of the Israel lobby with their smears, and the whole sort of like right wing political milieu jumps in to then use it for their own like political aims. Um, Brian Lilly, the Toronto Sun columnist, he posted something that honestly, if it was Nuremberg, he might find himself hung. Brian Lilly is just a fanatic Zionist, and of course, after World War II, there were journalists that were hung. And what he posted, he said Trump on solving the war in the Middle East with a massive Gaza renovation. Gaza renovation. That's what has happened, and driving all Palestinians out. That's the euphemism he's using is renovation. Just outrageously despicable kind of stuff. On a more positive note, the two final defendants of the Indigo 11, they got no record. They have a little bit of community service, 12-month probation. And so basically, the whole Indigo 11 collapsed. There was a letter this week from 40 Quebec professors, Jewish professors in Quebec, demanding that the higher education minister, who Pascal Derry, who got involved in the curriculum at two different cegeps, the colleges that were Palestine related. She's a former CJA person, and it was a letter condemning her and her use of the whole framing of all this as anti-Semitism. We occupied Melanie Jolie's office on Friday. Very good. It worked out quite well. I was a little nervous because there was we got we got about 15 people up there. They turned to the cops really quickly, but we got two articles out of it. It's quite a good little action. Today we occupied Stephen Guilbeault's office. They took a different tack. We were there for over 3 hours. I don't think we're going to get any media from it, but it was still a good action. About 20 people showed up last minute. Um, in in Ottawa on Saturday, it was a big demo, towards 20,000 people. The Parliament Hill, which is a huge area, apparently when it's like totally packed, it's around 100,000, and it felt pretty busy. And Certainly bigger than any demo that's happened during this whole election, right? We hear endlessly about the huge Pierre Poilievre demos. This is three, four, five times bigger than the biggest of the Poilievre rallies. Apparently, he claimed one time there was 15,000 at one of his rallies, and then CBC did a count, and they found like 1,600 or something like that. But it was a big demo, and it's impressive after 18 months and hundreds of demos. There was another demo here on Sunday. It was like 400 people on Sunday. So despite so many demos, despite all this smearing, despite the state repression, it's still a huge turnout like that in Ottawa. Um, so this uprising, obviously we want it to be bigger. We want it to be more effective than it's been, but it's still there, and there's still lots and lots of people mobilized. And amidst this election, it's clearly rattling around. Um, and Yeah, I'll leave it at that. And if people have comments and questions, and I'll make Laura a co-host. I think you're co-host now, Laura.
Oh, okay, thanks. Can I ask you a question about Quebec? Actually, I lived there for many years, and you said something tonight about the difference in response or reaction between Canada, English Canadians and French Canada. I was under the impression that Quebec was much more racist towards Muslims, and I had assumed that would mean less empathy for Palestine. Am I wrong in that?
I think it's partly correct. I mean, it is more anti-Muslim. There's no doubt about that. And I would say, as a general rule, it would be more racist or in Quebec, but particularly anti-Muslim. And But there's a whole sort of Palestine history as this like as an oppressed nation, solidarity with another oppressed nation's nationalism. There's a whole current of that within the Quebec sovereigntist movement. So in the 70s and 80s, the left in Quebec was way more pro-Palestinian than the left in English Canada. And so that's kind of like disappeared. Polls still show that Quebecers are more sympathetic to Palestinians than non-Quebecers in Canada.
Oh.
Uh, I think there's other elements to that. Like I think like Agence France Presse wire copy would tend to be a little bit better than AP wire copy on Palestine, right? So that filters into the media and stuff like that. And sort of if you they obviously people in Quebec would be more likely to watch French from France media than English Canada, and the French from France is a little bit, well, it's probably decent amount better than U.S. media, right, on Palestine, right? So English Canadians would tend to watch more U.S. media. I mean, English Canadian media is probably tends to generally be a bit better or less bad than U.S. media on Palestine, and then right. So those contribute to it. But I think the important point is that there was a time where there was a sort of the nationalist movement, which the left nationalists, of course, but the left nationalists sort of won in Quebec. That the or nationalist movement sort of won. Uh, yeah, they were more pro-Palestinian. So yes, it's more and a kernel of the anti-Muslim, I think also, or not just a kernel, a bit more than a kernel of the anti-Muslim stuff in Quebec is not like I think there is a actual legitimate uh laicite or non-religious or anti-religious that's not just about being anti-Muslim. I think it's really importantly, big part of it's anti-Muslim, but there is this sort of like the church was very oppressive in Quebec until
Mhm.
very recently, as part of the Quiet Revolution. We greatly weakened church power, and we are sort of anti-religious, and so that stuff is it's very contradictory. It's very hypocritical when you look at the big cross at the top of the mountain in Montreal, and you look at Saint Denis Street and Saint Catherine Street and Saint Laurent Street. I mean, every important street is called Saint something, right? But yeah, so there's yeah.
Okay, so B Sandu, go ahead.
Yeah, Eve, I wanted to ask this question that during this election period, there's been a lot of talk about, Chinese interference in the elections. People like Sam Cooper, others, almost daily, there's almost an obsession. Yet, if you look at a lot of the mainstream media in the last couple of weeks, especially, there've been a lot of candidates for example, have been denied in the Conservatives for interfering on behalf of India. There's been a number of articles that have come out in, I think, Globe and Mail, CTV, so forth. What do you make of that? Why is that not getting as much profile? And why is it not that being talked about, especially amongst the politicians themselves?
Well, I mean, I think the whole foreign interference thing is just a bash China. That's the whole. It was the whole point of it. It was about U.S. interference in Canada to uh, turn Canada to join its attack against China. That's what there is real foreign interference, and and the foreign interference was U.S. power in Canada to turn Canadian political culture anti-China, and by doing it the way you do it is by framing China as being aggressor against Canada. That's the sort of simple thing, and with regards to India, the geopolitics, there's not India is sort of it's a bit on the fence in terms of where it is with regards to Washington's geopolitical order. On one level, they see India as a use India as a counterweight to China. On the other level, clearly Modi is not going along with what Washington wants on, or what Biden at least wanted on Ukraine and other issues. So the sort of the whole point of the foreign interference, India just kind of complicates the foreign interference narrative. There's space to criticize India. Clearly, like Jagmeet Singh, he's quite keen to talk about Indian interference, I think for his own political kind of outlook. Um, and obviously, the assassination is far and away the most egregious example of foreign or presumed, and I do presume India was behind it, foreign interference, act of not necessarily the most influential, but the most egregious act. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of my sense of that. Yeah.
Okay, Catherine, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted, just in case there's anybody in Nova Scotia or anywhere near New Glasgow, there's an all candidates meeting on Thursday, the 17th, this coming Thursday, hosted by the Pictou County Chamber of Commerce. And it's at the Wellness Center in New Glasgow. And I put in a question which I used the Lemkin Institute statement that you talked about, Eve. So thank you very much for mentioning that. Um, and it sounds that the somebody at the Chamber of Commerce was quite positive about the question being asked, and so it might. I mean, they don't say for sure. There's lots of questions and everything, but it might actually get asked. So if anyone then wants to be there and be good to have more people, Palestine solidarity in the audience. I'm going to try to pass out some pamphlets outside, and
I think it's very
yeah,
important to
see how it goes.
go to as many electoral kind of events and campaign offices and this and that and raise the issue. I think there's a certain space that the election gives to push on this stuff.
Can I ask you, there's no other question, so I just want to finish with this. When you look at this point at the public platforms of the two main parties and also the NDP and Green, I mean, between the two main parties, are you seeing any real noted differences between their platform they're running on in terms of foreign policy?
Maybe a little bit on Palestine stuff between some of the NDP and Greens versus the Liberals and Conservatives. But no, I mean when Jonathan Pedneau, who is not like going to come even close to winning uh his seat, and the Greens are probably going to may just end up with just Elizabeth May. They might not even end up with any seat. They might keep Mike Morris as well, but I don't think that's going to happen. They may not have any seats, and the gist of what Jonathan Pedneau said was just the same as it could have been. It could have been, with the exception of referring to genocide in Gaza, it could have been Mark Carney making that speech. I mean, really, I mean, it was so like what's the point of the Greens exist? I mean, they would say on other issues they're different, but like on the foreign policy, his his statement, his 7 minute statement was really like the no to F-35. I mean, that's Mark Carney's position anyways, right? Um, uh, so yeah, it's pretty remarkable. I think on the Palestine there are some differences. And I do think that Poilievre's going to be substantially worse, particularly on the repression side, in the actual specifics of diplomatic realm and the charities and Canadians fighting in Israeli military and UN votes. I don't know how much different it's going to be, but he will be he probably would cut UNRWA funding and he will be more repressive of Palestine movement. And I think Carney is setting up to be a little bit better than Trudeau on Palestine. Like he made a comment to he responded to Radio Kana interview um I guess it was last Sunday, not Sunday past, not yesterday. And um his comment was kind of like bringing in Trump's policy on Gaza, uh the annexation of Canada, and I maybe to mention Greenland, but also Ukraine, and basically saying, like, comparing it. Now, the bunch of the pro-Israel groups got really angered by that. I assume that's part of why Netanyahu did his intervention, not just based upon the heckling incident, because that's very dangerous framing from a Zionist perspective, because it's making the Palestine Canadian nationalism. It's saying that we're being targeted by this Trump bully for annexation, just as the Trump bully supports annexation of Gaza kind of angle. I've suggested in the past that we should be trying to not go too far with that nationalist stuff in the Palestine solidarity world and more generally in the anti-war world, but nonetheless take advantage of some of that kind of dynamic. But yeah, so I think that no, I mean no, clearly it's a pretty consensus sort of foreign policy. There's no real sort of, there's no voice saying, is there anyone, with the exception of the People's Party guy, who says anything about, like, let's stop providing more and more weapons and funding to Ukraine? No. Is there anybody saying that we need to seriously change on China? No. NDP is criticizing the Liberals from a more hawkish. So are the Conservatives. And Jonathan Pedneau he didn't really get into details on China, but he certainly framed China as this sort of serious threat. So no, the big outline is, and no one says anything about Haiti. No one says it. I'm not seeing anything even being said about, like, mining companies, really. It's like, on these things like that, like the mining stuff and the Canadian mining abuses, unless groups are just, like, really pushing it, it just gets completely left to the side, right? And the politicians just don't mention it. The media doesn't mention it, of course. Um, So yeah, the big outlines are kind of the same across the board.
Okay, before we go to Hans, I just want to say I find it weird that they're also into the anti-China thing now. You would think, given what we're facing from the US right now, and in terms of trade and things, you would think people would be reticent to go so hard on China when it could be, a good partner, a good, you know.
Yeah, I totally agreed. I mean, it's at minimum, it's this sort of bargaining chip with the U.S. too, and that's why Legault, the Quebec premier's comment. I think that's why they made a big deal of it in the Journal de Montréal, is because it does go so much against the grain, and I think it's a pretty Legault is not he's a pretty right-wing guy, but yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, Hans, go ahead, and we'll make Hans be the last question. Go ahead, Hans.
Okay, tomorrow, the 15th, CJPME has been the backbone of the Vote Palestine campaign. And while its demands don't mention the G word in any particularly prominent way, its primary thrust is to ask for a two-way arms embargo, which surely is a demand that we support. So tomorrow, as an all-out day in many riding associations, I think we should fall in behind this activity. And for however small the chances of the NDP winning many seats, the fact that virtually all of the NDP and all of the Green candidates have supported this, even some liberals, and even my liberal cabinet minister here in the Beaches East York riding. We should, in my opinion, and I want to ask yours, Eve, we should fall in behind that campaign.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's there, it's trying to get Palestine into the election, and it's gotten a lot. I was on the site yesterday, or the day before, because I was doing this press release on Stephen Guilbeault, and I wanted to just confirm that Nima Machouf, the NDP candidate, had actually signed it. And there's dozens, hundreds of candidates that have signed that have made the pledge. So I get what they're doing. They're trying to come up with demands that are pretty mainstream to sort of woo in, and they want to get quite a few liberal incumbents and liberal candidates and stuff to sign it. And that one of the things that created a big stir this week was that one of the liberal MPs was maybe was at a mosque or something. He was referring to a genocide and kind of making Palestine a pretty big part. And a clip of that was circulated by all the Zionist groups, and they were trying to attack Carney over that and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's worth supporting. I also think that these other, I mean, maybe this is a bit more ad hoc, but this going to the riding association offices are all open. They're unlike, sorry, election campaigns offices are all open. Unlike riding associations, it's very easy to get in them, and they usually are their storefront, and doing actions there. I think is something really worth thinking about as well. But yeah, I think the Vote Palestine pledge is a positive development in there. I know that I don't think it's just tomorrow. I thought there was something tied to the leaders debate that was also happening on the 16th and the 17th. But yeah, people should check out that site for more to plug into to their activities.
And Eve, just before we go now, I'll put in a plug for our friend Yuri, who I believe on his channel this week, he has a debate between someone from the NDP and the Green Party, making the position for why they should vote for that particular party. I'm looking forward to watching it myself.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eve.
I think it's the NDP and the Communist Party, maybe, no?
Oh, really? I thought it was
Maybe it was
Green and
I don't
NDP.
know.
I could be wrong.
I think I saw a debate that Yuri had with
Oh,
a Communist Party person, and I thought it was an NDPer, but I'm not sure.
oh, okay. Oh, maybe so. Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks, Eve.